In 1869, Manhattan and Brooklyn were separate cities divided by treacherous waters. Businessmen lost fortunes waiting for ferries. Families were separated by storms that could last for days. The East River was a liquid barrier that choked the region's growth. Then came a proposal so audacious it bordered on madness: a suspension bridge longer than any ever built, held aloft by steel cables that existed only in theory. Critics called it a monument to folly. Engineers whispered it would collapse under its own weight. What they didn't foresee was that the river would fight back, claiming the bridge's creator and leaving his widow to finish what many believed was impossible. By 1860, the East River had become a choke point strangling two great American cities. Each day, more than 150,000 people crammed onto wooden ferry boats. Businessmen, laborers, families, all at the mercy of weather and tide. The ferry system carried an astounding 50 million passengers annually, but at a devastating cost to the region's potential. When winter storms blew in, everything stopped. Ice floes made crossing impossible for days, sometimes weeks. Food supplies dwindled. Medical emergencies became death sentences. The economic toll was catastrophic. Workers lost wages, merchants watched shipments rot, and manufacturers fell behind competitors in Philadelphia and Boston. Brooklyn, though America's fourth largest city, found itself trapped in Manhattan's shadow. Its independence was a point of pride, but the river barrier was slowly suffocating its growth. Some mornings, ferry lines stretched for blocks. In fog or storms, the wait could last hours if crossings happened at all. The business leaders of both cities understood the existential threat. The region was falling behind other urban centers where railroads and new infrastructure were revolutionizing commerce. Something had to change, but changing the East River, one of America's most dangerous waterways, would require vision that bordered on the impossible. That vision belonged to John Roebling, a Prussian immigrant who had witnessed the catastrophic failures of early suspension bridges in Europe. These disasters had haunted him since his engineering studies, driving an obsession with perfection that defined his career in America. Roebling's journey began in 1831, when he fled the repressive Prussian regime seeking freedom in the American experiment. He brought with him engineering knowledge far beyond what existed in the young nation. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. He would need to prove himself in a country suspicious of foreign expertise. His early bridge projects were modest by later standards, but each taught critical lessons: a canal aqueduct in Pennsylvania, a suspension bridge over the Monongahela River. Each success built his reputation, but it was his wire rope factory in Trenton, New Jersey, that truly revolutionized American bridge building. Until Roebling, suspension bridges relied on iron chains that frequently failed under stress. His steel cable factory produced wire rope of unprecedented strength, the essential innovation that would make the Brooklyn Bridge possible. Yet for all his technical genius, Roebling carried another weight, ensuring his son Washington would surpass his own achievements. Washington Roebling graduated from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute just as the Civil War erupted. He served as a military engineer, building bridges under enemy fire, practical experience that would prove invaluable. After the war, father and son collaborated on the Cincinnati-Covington Bridge, a critical testing ground for the techniques they would need in New York. The battle to build the Brooklyn Bridge began long before the first stone was laid. In 1867, when John Roebling formally proposed his audacious span, he faced entrenched opposition from every direction. The notorious Tammany Hall political machine controlled much of New York's government and had deep financial interests in the ferry companies. A bridge would destroy a reliable source of kickbacks and patronage jobs. They mobilized their considerable political power against the project. The established engineering community was equally dismissive. They pointed to recent bridge disasters in Europe and declared Roebling's proposed span, nearly twice the length of any existing suspension bridge, an impossibility. Even the venerated American Society of Civil Engineers raised doubts about the fundamental physics of the design. Financial warfare erupted as competing interests proposed alternative solutions. Some advocated for tunnels, others for different bridge designs at different locations. Each proposal came with financial backers who stood to profit enormously if their version won approval. Newspapers, often controlled by political or business interests, fueled public fear. They published sensational articles describing the horrific consequences of bridge collapse, with illustrations of hundreds drowning in the East River. Public opinion wavered between desperate need and terror of disaster. The final approval came only after extraordinary political maneuvering. William Boss Tweed, the corrupt head of Tammany Hall, unexpectedly backed the project, not from civic virtue, but because he saw opportunities for graft in the massive construction contracts. On April 16, 1869, the New York Bridge Company was chartered by the state legislature, with John Roebling as chief engineer. Just weeks after securing approval, John Roebling stood at Fulton Ferry Landing, conducting final site measurements. As he positioned his transit, a ferry slammed into the pier. The impact shifted the heavy equipment, crushing Roebling's foot against the timbers. Though painful, the injury seemed minor, until tetanus set in. On his deathbed, Roebling transferred the project to his 32-year-old son, Washington. "Remember," he told Washington, "the calculations are all in my head." The fever took John Roebling on July 22, 1869. The most ambitious bridge in history now rested on his son's shoulders. The human cost began mounting even before major construction. During preliminary surveys, a worker drowned when his boat capsized in the treacherous currents. Another fell from scaffolding and broke his back. The East River claimed its first sacrifices, but these were merely the opening casualties. For Washington's wife, Emily, the project meant transforming her life completely. A society woman educated at Georgetown, she suddenly found herself a bridge builder's wife, moving to Brooklyn Heights to be near the construction. She couldn't have imagined how thoroughly the bridge would consume her existence. As workers began preparing for the foundations, a mysterious affliction appeared. Men working in the underwater chambers emerged with excruciating pain, paralysis, and sometimes blindness or death. No one understood that this caisson disease, later called the bends, was caused by nitrogen bubbles forming in the blood during rapid decompression. The bridge was claiming lives in ways no one had anticipated. To build foundations strong enough to support the massive bridge towers, Washington Roebling designed enormous wooden chambers called caissons. Inverted boxes lowered to the riverbed and pressurized with compressed air to keep water out, while men excavated the river bottom inside. The Brooklyn side caisson was sunk in May 1870, a wooden chamber larger than most buildings, 102 feet long and 168 feet wide. Workers descended through airlocks to labor in shifting mud under the pressure of compressed air. They dug with shovels and pickaxes by the light of gas lamps, breathing foul air in claustrophobic conditions. As the caisson reached deeper depths, the compressed air pressure increased. Workers emerging from shifts began showing horrific symptoms: crippling joint pain, paralysis, convulsions, sometimes death within minutes of reaching the surface. The mysterious caisson disease killed and crippled dozens, but work continued. The foundation needed to reach bedrock. Then disaster struck the project's leadership. Washington Roebling began personally inspecting the caissons daily, spending hours in the compressed air environment. In June 1872, after emerging from the Manhattan caisson, he collapsed. The diagnosis: severe caisson disease. Washington would never fully recover, remaining partially paralyzed and extremely sensitive to noise and vibration. With the chief engineer bedridden, the project faced collapse. This is when Emily Roebling stepped forward in what would become one of the most remarkable engineering feats of the 19th century. Not just building the bridge, but doing so while maintaining the fiction that her husband remained in charge. Newspapers began questioning whether a paralyzed man could possibly oversee such a complex project. Public confidence wavered. The bridge company board considered replacing Washington, which would have destroyed the Roebling legacy. Emily ensured this never happened. Emily Roebling's transformation began with necessity. With her husband confined to their Brooklyn Heights apartment, someone had to relay his instructions to the site. Soon, she was doing far more than communicating. She was learning engineering. She studied higher mathematics, strength of materials, cable construction, stress analysis, subjects no American woman had formally studied before. Washington became her teacher from his sickbed, and Emily his hands and eyes at the construction site. Each morning, she would review plans with Washington, then cross to the construction site to relay instructions. Each evening, she would return with questions from contractors and engineers. As months stretched into years, she moved beyond messenger to active participant, suggesting solutions, identifying problems, and making decisions when Washington was too ill to be disturbed. The public deception was necessary in an era when women were considered incapable of engineering work. Official reports carefully maintained the fiction that Washington was directing every aspect of construction from his office at home. In reality, Emily was inspecting cables, monitoring material quality, negotiating with contractors, and managing the complex logistics of America's largest construction project. Her technical contributions proved crucial during several crises. When defective wire was discovered in 1878, threatening the entire cable system, Emily helped develop testing protocols to identify the substandard material. When a cable slipped from its anchorage the same year, nearly destroying public confidence, Emily's calm management helped prevent the project's abandonment. For over a decade, Emily lived a double life: society woman in public, engineer in private. Her health suffered under the immense strain, yet she persisted through the project's darkest hours. The true cost of the Brooklyn Bridge cannot be measured in dollars, but in human lives. Official records acknowledge only 20 deaths, but this number deliberately ignores the slow deaths from caisson disease that occurred after workers left the project. In the Brooklyn caisson alone, over 100 men suffered decompression sickness. Many were permanently disabled, unable to work again. Without workers' compensation laws, they received nothing for their sacrifice. Their names, mostly Irish and German immigrants, are largely lost to history. E.F. Farrington, the master mechanic who supervised the caisson work, suffered permanent heart damage that eventually killed him. Another engineer, C.C. Martin, emerged from an inspection with temporary paralysis, but survived to later become the bridge's superintendent. The most poignant stories belong to those who never had the chance to see the completed bridge. 23-year-old John McGovern died when a hoisting rope broke, dropping him into the river. Patrick McKay fell from the Brooklyn Tower in 1879, just 4 years before completion. Wesley Brewer was crushed by a falling derrick in 1878. Even after construction, the death toll continued. During a stampede caused by panic just days after the bridge opened, 12 people were crushed to death against the railings. The bridge that was supposed to save lives had claimed more. For the Roebling family, the cost was equally devastating. Washington lived the remainder of his life as an invalid, watching the world through a telescope from his bedroom window. Emily sacrificed her health and any recognition of her extraordinary contributions. Their son, John A. Roebling II, grew up in the shadow of the bridge, his childhood marked by a father too ill to participate in normal family life. On May 24, 1883, after 14 years of construction, the Brooklyn Bridge officially opened. President Chester A. Arthur and New York Governor Grover Cleveland led the ceremonies. An estimated 150,000 people attended the celebration, with fireworks illuminating the completed span. Emily Roebling was given the honor of the first official crossing, carrying a rooster in her lap, a traditional symbol of victory. This small acknowledgement was the only public recognition of her crucial role. As she crossed the mile-long span, she perhaps reflected on the structure that had consumed nearly half her life. The bridge immediately transformed both cities. Within 24 hours of opening, nearly 250,000 people paid the penny toll to cross on foot. Property values in Brooklyn soared as Manhattan businesses suddenly found the adjacent city accessible regardless of weather. Public skepticism about the bridge's safety lingered until P.T. Barnum, the master showman, marched 21 elephants across the span in 1884. Led by Jumbo, the elephants' combined weight, over 100,000 pounds, visibly demonstrated the structure's strength to even the most doubtful observer. The Brooklyn Bridge became an immediate engineering marvel, the longest suspension bridge in the world, with towers that were the tallest structures in the Western Hemisphere. Its pioneering use of steel cables, pneumatic caissons, and innovative construction techniques revolutionized bridge building worldwide. More profound than its technical achievements was its symbolic power. The bridge physically connected two great cities, but it also represented the connection between old world engineering and American innovation, between impossible dreams and concrete achievement. The final accounting of the Brooklyn Bridge includes more than its $15 million cost, equivalent to over $400 million today. The human ledger is harder to balance. At least 27 men died during construction, with possibly dozens more succumbing to caisson disease in the years following. Hundreds were injured or permanently disabled. Families lost fathers, husbands, and sons to an infrastructure project whose necessity seemed obvious to city leaders, but perhaps less clear to those who paid with their lives. For Emily Roebling, the bridge's completion brought not recognition but erasure. Historical accounts credited John Roebling with the vision and Washington with the execution, while Emily's extraordinary contribution was reduced to helping her husband. It would be nearly a century before engineering historians fully acknowledged her role. The bridge itself embodied both American promise and American contradiction. Built largely by immigrant labor, it represented opportunity and inclusion. Yet those same immigrants received the lowest wages, performed the most dangerous work, and were quickly forgotten once their usefulness ended. The technical innovations pioneered on the Brooklyn Bridge made possible the great suspension spans of the 20th century, the Golden Gate, the Verrazano Narrows, and bridges worldwide. Steel cable suspension became the standard for long-span bridges, and the caisson foundation technique, despite its human cost, revolutionized underwater construction. Perhaps the most significant legacy was civic. The bridge catalyzed the 1898 consolidation that created Greater New York City, uniting the five boroughs into a global metropolis. The bridge that connected two cities ultimately helped create one great city. Today, the Brooklyn Bridge stands as more than infrastructure. It is a testament to human determination, a memorial to sacrifice, and an enduring symbol of connection. Emily Roebling has finally received her due recognition. In 2018, a plaque was placed on the Brooklyn Bridge to honor her as America's first female field engineer. Her persistence in finishing what many believed impossible now inspires engineering students worldwide, particularly women entering a field that once explicitly excluded them. The bridge itself has transcended its utilitarian purpose to become an icon of American achievement. Its distinctive Gothic arches and web of cables have appeared in countless photographs, paintings, films, and literature. It has witnessed history from the immigrant waves of the early 20th century to the tragedy of 9/11, standing as a constant while the city around it transformed. Every stone, cable, and rivet carries the memory of those who created it, from the Roeblings to the anonymous laborers who risked and sometimes lost their lives in its construction. Their legacy is measured not just in steel and granite, but in the millions of journeys made possible over nearly 150 years. The Brooklyn Bridge asks us to consider profound questions about progress. What price is worth paying for advancement? Who decides which sacrifices are acceptable? And who ultimately benefits from monumental public works? Perhaps its greatest meaning lies in the democratic nature of its legacy. The bridge serves everyone equally, rich and poor, native and immigrant, famous and anonymous. In a nation often divided by class, culture, and origin, the Brooklyn Bridge remains what it was always intended to be, a connection between worlds that would otherwise remain separated. It stands today as proof that the most beautiful achievements often rise from the deepest suffering, and that the greatest monuments are those that connect rather than divide us.